Drink, friend. Drink it slow. This is a story of a sin committed in the Emperor's name, not against the void, but against a truth too vast to bear. It began in the desolate Hydra sector. Our cruiser, the indomitable Will, received a heavily encrypted order to investigate a situation on the remote, deep-sea research platform, Poseidon 7. We were far off the charts when we approached the target. Then, a complete, instantaneous silence. Communications hadn't faded. They had been abruptly cut. We arrived at the coordinates, and the sight was terrifyingly serene. The massive platform, a spire of Imperial engineering anchored deep into the planet's crust, was clearly visible on our long-range sensors. It was intact. Absolutely no sign of explosion, Xenos breach, or internal fire. All automated beacons confirmed power, and life support systems were nominal. But as the indomitable Will entered low orbit, I felt it. It was a crushing pressure. Not kinetic, but distinctly psychic and psychological. The ocean here was not the usual pleasant blue or defiant dark. It was a homogeneous, suffocating black. An active, hungry vacuum. And it was pressing not just on the platform's reinforced hull, but directly on the bulkheads of my mind, purposefully attacking the Imperial concept of order, sanity, and logic. I took 2 trusted guardsmen, the veterans you know, the stoic Fabian and the mighty Orcus, and a grim, silent tech priest. We shuttled down to the platform in a cramped armored vessel. Inside, once we breached the airlock, it was disconcertingly clean. The cleanliness was terrifying because it implied an immediate, voluntary departure. In the mess hall, tables were still set for a meal. A pristine, slightly warm mug sat beside a half-read data slate in the central laboratory. Tools, calibrated and gleaming, were neatly arranged on every workbench. The air was charged with a faint electrical hum and the quiet rush of ventilation. But no one was there. 74 personnel assigned to Poseidon 7 had simply vanished. No bodies, no plasma burns, no spilled blood. No sign of a struggle that would justify calling the Ordos. This was worse than a warp demon. A warp demon leaves a visible mess. Here, it was as if the entire staff had simply stood up, simultaneously, walked away from their duties, and the building had politely locked itself behind them. A wet, penetrating cold permeated the air, not the cold of absence like in the frozen warp, but the cold of the abyss. It smelled of salt and something else, something mineral, metallic, and so unimaginably ancient that it had no conceivable name in Low Gothic. We walked the perfectly clean corridors, and I could feel my resolve, my will, starting to flake at the edges. I gripped my last pistol tighter, hoping to find anything, a foe, a Xenos, anything solid, to shoot. We found him on the bridge. It was the highest, most reinforced point of the platform, where thick, armored viewport windows stared straight into the abyss. It was the senior operations technician. The name, Cassian. He was sitting in his command chair, his back to us, perfectly still, watching, staring into the black, featureless depths below. Fabian, Orcus, and I slowly entered the room, laser-guns raised. The tech priest remained by the entrance, his bionic eyes whirring and straining to process sensory input he could not comprehend. "Technician Cassian?" I asked. My voice, carefully controlled, sounded jarringly loud in the ambient hum. He did not twitch a muscle. He just kept looking into the absolute blackness. Then I saw his hands. They were resting on the console panel. He was gently, almost reverently, tracing perfect non-Euclidean spirals into the surface dust with his finger. They were not random scribbles. They were precise, geometrically impossible convergences on a point that fundamentally should not exist. I stepped closer. Finally, he slowly turned his head, and I saw his eyes. They were completely filled with darkness, not just dilated pupils. No, It felt as though his eye sockets contained two small, utterly opaque pieces of the very black void he was watching. There was no terror, no panic, no typical warp madness. That was the most terrifying thing. There was only cold, awful, indifferent truth. He began to speak, his voice calm, directed at the viewport. Not us. He sleeps. He is too large, too ancient for human measure. He spoke of the sleeper at the bottom. These were not the words of a ranting heretic making up tales. These were the words of a man who had seen something that existed outside the reality bounded by our segment of materium. We are merely ripples on the water, crumbs floating on a momentary surface. We found him by accident with our probes, his dreams. His dreams are what we call our world. I asked him, my own voice slightly trembling. Where are the others? Cassian smiled. It was not a smile of joy, relief, or pain. It was the awful smile of final comprehension. They went to him. They heard the call, his dreams. They call home. They saw the real geometry, Commissar. And ours? Our geometry of planes and straight lines is a necessary lie, a simplification to make us easier, not to break. He looked down at the impossible spiral he had drawn on the desk. They saw that everything they knew was just a comfortable oblivion, constructed so we wouldn't go mad from the truth. But he stirs, and his stirring, it is the end of the ripple. It brings clarity. There was no panic in his words. There was only cold, dreadful logic. He was not possessed by a demon. He was enlightened by an alien truth. We left the bridge, leaving Cassian staring into the viewport. But the entity had already begun to seep into us. Fabian, my most loyal guardsman, suddenly screamed, staring at his hands. Commissar, they are not straight. They are bending. I cannot straighten them. I can see them buckling wrong, the way they were always meant to. He descended into a high-pitched fit, trying to force his fingers into a correct configuration, terrified by a glimpse of the wrong, curved geometry shown to him by the sleeping giant. Orcus, my second veteran, simply froze, his gaze locked on the corridor walls. They are breathing, he whispered, his voice thin and dry. The walls are breathing, and I can hear them whispering about me. They know I am here, and they are waiting patiently. These were not the effects of chaos. Chaos screams. It gives shape to madness. This was the pure, undiluted unmaking of the very reality we believed in. The entity held no malice. It simply did not care. Its dreams were so vast and alien that simply brushing against them made us perceive a truth our minds could not sustain. I knew if we brought Cassian or these guardsmen onto the cruiser, we would bring the infection with us. The infection of knowledge. I ordered the tech priest to retrieve all remaining data from the platform, but when he plugged his mechadendrites into the main cogitator, he let out a mechanical shriek that was more feedback than human. Commissar, the data. It is structurally unsound. It is 534 dimensions. I cannot process it. My mind sees that 2 + 2 equals too much. He violently ripped the cables out, his sensor eyes frozen, and he began to scrape his metallic, articulated hands across the deck, trying to gouge the wrong spirals into the floor. I had only one desperate choice left. I knew I could not fight truth with a last pistol. I looked at Fabian, still writhing in agony, trying to exercise impossible geometry from his bending hands. I looked at Orcus, who was now quietly weeping, conversing with the walls. I looked at the tech priest, who was destroying his own logic circuits, trying to fit 534 dimensions into his cogitator mind. I turned and returned one last time to the bridge. Cassian was still staring out the viewport. "You understand now, Commissar?" he asked without malice. "I do," I replied, and the lie of my emperor felt heavier than my armor. There was no heresy in his words. There was only cold, awful, indifferent truth. We were ants who had accidentally drilled into a sleeping giant's tomb, and his dreams drove us mad because they contained no anger, no love, no malice, and no mercy, only pure cosmic indifference to our existence. I could not risk it. I could not allow that knowledge, that infection of reality, to spread beyond this platform. Our emperor built our world on a comforting lie of geometry and a solid, unwavering faith, so that we might remain sane. I contacted Captain Arena on the cruiser. I gave the most horrific order of my life. Captain, coordinates Poseidon 7. Prepare for total annihilation via orbital lance strike. Use your primary lance, exactly 10 minutes from now, regardless of our status aboard. The silence on the Vox was worse than any scream of the damned. "Are you absolutely certain, Commissar?" she asked, her voice tight. "You are violating 37 primary protocols." "I am certain, Captain," I said, looking into the empty black eyes of Cassian, which reflected the abyss. Better to err on the side of excessive, total ruthlessness than to risk fully awakening this thing. "Fire on my confirmation." I cut the comms. Cassian turned to me, the smile still chilling. "So, you choose blindness? You choose the 2+4 lie?" he asked, almost sadly. I drew my last pistol. It was not the execution of a heretic. It was an act of terrible mercy and ultimate imperial duty. I had to end this knowledge and everyone who possessed it. I shot Cassian in the head. I killed Fabian and Orcus, quickly and cleanly before they could feel the pain. I shot the tech priest, ending his suffering and the destruction of his machine mind. I locked the exit hatches and ran to the shuttle bay. I launched with barely 2 minutes remaining before impact. In the last, brief moments as the shuttle ascended rapidly through the black water, I glanced down. I saw the black water beneath the platform begin to shudder. It was not the movement of tides, it was a vast, deep internal stirring. And then the orbital strike hit. The primary lance vaporized Poseidon 7 and the surrounding ocean into steam and molten planetary crust. And with it, the sin of knowledge was purged. I returned to the cruiser alone. I filed the official report. Total technical failure of all containment systems, uncontrolled reactor meltdown, followed by necessary site destruction, full expenditure of required ordnance during liquidation of subsequent mutated bioforms. Not a single word about Cassian, the spirals, the geometry, or the sleeper. Warp demons are simple. They hate you, and you know who to hate back. But this entity, it simply is. It means us no harm because it cannot fathom our relevance. It simply does not care about our existence. And that crushing cosmic indifference is the true horror that will break a man faster than any demon. I tell you this, friend, because sometimes, to serve the Emperor, you must kill 74 innocent Imperial servants and wipe them from orbit, just so they don't infect others with the truth. Better to live in blindness and fight the enemies we can see than to gain sight and go mad forever. I am done. Now, pour me another. And for the sake of your own sanity, forget everything I just told you.